Now, a lot of us doing our Irish family tree research have this kind of family tree. There's me, there's my dad's grandparents, great-grandparents. I've gone back to about 1800, and then I've kind of hit a brick wall with about half my ancestors, 1830 for the other half. And that's after exhausting all the usual resources such as the family lore, the letters in the attic, the family Bible, the 1901 and 1911 censuses, before that Griffith's valuation, and all the cancelled books from the valuation office every 2 years thereafter. Very, very helpful. We also have the birth, marriages and deaths, the civil registration, 1865 onwards for Catholics, or 1864 onwards for Catholics, 1845 onwards for non-Catholics, and then the church records, which can go back into the 1700s, but most of them start around about 1800, 1830. So it's kind of potluck whether your particular area of interest is included in those church records. And then we also have a variety of other sources like as newspapers. They really put the flesh on the bones of your family tree. For those with Dublin heritage like myself, Glasnevin Cemetery is a fantastic source of information. The electoral rolls are coming online as well. So there's a variety of bits of information, but you still have this brick wall around about the 1800 time point. The question is, how do you break through it? And that's what I'm going to talk to you today about, how I used Y-DNA to break through one of my ancestral lines, this one here, which is actually the Spearin line. And Spearin is particularly relevant to this area because they worked on the Adare estate. So I'm home, I've come home. So when I started researching the Spearin name, and just to show you how strangely it's spelt, S-P-I-E-R-I-N, very unusual, I thought, looking at my ancestors, let me start with that particular name because it's very unusual. That'll be an easy one to research. So that's where I started with Spearin. But I met Bob Spearing from New Jersey, who's online a couple of years into my research, and he gave this incredible tale about how there are two old wills from Limerick in 1719, 1726. And from those, he was able to put together this draft family tree of these early Limerick Spearins. And they married into the Hartwell family. And the Hartwells were mayors of Limerick in 1676 and 1677. And they were granted land in Limerick by King Charles I for their services to the crown. And then Sir William Beetham, who was Chief Herald or Ulster King of Arms of Ireland back in the 1820s, he has a brief scrap of information about the Spearins that links them to a family of goldsmiths in London. And these goldsmiths, we've got tons of information about them, and they were associated perhaps with a group of Spearins up in Cambridge, one of whom was granted a license to print by King Henry VIII and became one of the first printers of the Cambridge University Press. And they came originally from Flanders. And their best friend was Erasmus. So my dad said, well, I might be related to them, but not you. So this was a fantastic tale, but could be actually supported with documentary evidence. And so here were a variety of different researchers in New Jersey, Ontario, Georgia, Australia, Ireland, all of them with different spellings of the surname. Spearing, Spearin, Spearin with two E's. The I and the A are turned around, and then there's a Sperin over there as well. Could all of these different surname variations be related to each other? Nah, I don't think so. I had my doubts. But what we did was, we reconstructed our various trees with the information we had. So this was one of the Ontario families here. There's the brick wall in red around about 1770. Here is Bob's one from New Jersey, ending in Luke in 1794. Here's one from Limerick, ending in 1833. And this one is in Australia in 1791. And then we have a couple of generations before we get to the early Limerick Spearins that we identified in those wills. And then we have the London ones, and then the Cambridge ones, and then back to Flanders. Could we go back to the 1400s? This was the tantalizing question. One particular family was lucky, and that was because those people who married into the Hartwell family named their children Hartwell Spearin, Charles Hartwell Spearin, George Hartwell Spearin. And you can see this today in some of the families have some of the Spearman families living today in their ancestry. There's a Hartwell there, there's another Hartwell there, and these are the wills from Matthew Spearman and Luke Spearman mentioning the Hartwells, and that's how we constructed the early Limerick Spearmans, and there you see Hartwell up there, a Hartwell Spearman up there. Another common name that was passed down in both families is Luke. So we have a Luke up there, we have a Luke over there as well, then we have a Luke down here, a Luke down here, a Luke over here. Yes. So there's a lot of evidence that actually links some of the Spearman families today with those early Limerick Spearmans because of the presence of Hartwell as a forename. And the Hartwell as a forename is as rare as hen's teeth. In the US, they stopped recording Hartwell as a forename in 1967 because there have been fewer than 4 Hartwells as forenames since then. So that gives you an idea of how rare it is. So in all probability, 99.9% probability, that Limerick family that actually has Hartwell today can go back to Hartwell back in the early 1700s. And so he turns to DNA. Here's somebody swabbing their cheek or spitting it into a test tube. That test tube then goes off to the lab in an envelope, and I have DNA kits here. We tested a few people already. They're going to post that envelope off to the States tomorrow. And then when it gets to the lab, they look at your sample, they put it through the analyzing machine, and they post your results on your own dedicated web page with your username and password. So it's private, password protected, you can see it, and you can look at your results. Not only that, but they compare your results with everybody else in their database. And there are 1 million people who have done a DNA test with Family Tree DNA, 1 million with 23andMe, and 1 million with Ancestry. And they compare your results with everybody else in the database, and they put a list of matches with their email addresses up on your web page, and then you can contact those people and say, hey, I see we're a DNA match. It looks like we might be related somehow. Do you want to compare family trees and see if we can sort out just exactly how we are connected to each other? The other great advantage of family tree DNA is that they've actually created an infrastructure where you can start your own projects. So I run the Gleason project, the Farrell project, and the Spearman project on family tree DNA, and you gather people together who have the same interest in that surname. And so, for example, with the Spearman, there's about 40 people in that group. With Gleason, there's about 107, and with Farrell, there's a lot more, about 170 or so. So it's a way of getting people together to research particular surnames. Now, let's have a closer look at the DNA sample that you've given, because when you scrape your cheek, you're dislodging cheek cells onto the swab. And then the swab goes into the test tube. In each cell in your body, you have approximately 6 billion DNA markers. And some of those markers are included in the mitochondria, those little blue things up there, which are like the batteries of the cell, they give you energy. And that's called mitochondrial DNA. That's only passed on from mothers to their children. It's not passed on from fathers. So your mitochondrial DNA, you got it from your mother, she got it from her mother, she got it from her mother, 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 going back 200,000 years. So it's very, very useful for tracing the direct female line back. But it's only one ancestral line. Mother, 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 mother. In the nucleus of the cell, this little green blob up here, we have the 46 chromosomes arranged into 23 pairs. And the 23rd pair is also called the sex chromosomes, and they're called either X or Y. And with women, they get 2 X chromosomes, and with men, you get an X and a Y chromosome, and you end up looking like that. So, yes. The Y chromosome is very short and stumpy. The X chromosome is about 3 times larger, which basically means that the average woman is more of a person genetically than the average man. Hey. Yes, girl power. So those are the 3 types. Those are the types of DNA. The 3 major types of DNA tests then are the test for the Y DNA, which goes back along the father's line, because the Y DNA is only passed from father to son. So that'll go back father, 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 father. On the other side, we have the mitochondrial DNA, which goes back mother, 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 on the direct female line. So with the Y DNA and the mitochondrial DNA, you're just doing one ancestral line, and they're on the extremes of your family tree. One's on the direct male line, one's on the direct female line. The autosomal DNA, which is basically another word for all the other chromosomes. Chromosome 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 22, and then the X chromosome. These help you go back on all of your ancestral lines. All of your ancestral lines, but only about 5, 6, 7 generations. So that would be the level of your 4 times great-grandparents, and you've got 64 of those. So with the Y-DNA and the mitochondrial DNA, you do 1 ancestral line. With the autosomal DNA, you do 64, roughly. Okay? So it's all of your ancestors. Now, the Y-DNA and the mitochondrial DNA are very, very good for deep and recent ancestry. So they're used for migration studies. And they study the pathway of human migration out of Africa 50,000 years ago was when the last major exodus out of Africa took place. And that's where present-day non-Africans were all derived from that group of humans that came out of Africa 50,000 years ago. But the reach of Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA actually goes back 200,000 years, maybe even 300,000 years for the Y-DNA. So it's very, very useful for people who are studying human migration, along with archaeology and linguistics. When you get your Y-DNA results, you get an array of markers, an array of numbers. It doesn't really make much sense on its own. You know, this marker here is DIS4460, and the value for that marker is 11. Doesn't tell you very much. You only get, it only becomes useful when you start comparing your marker values with somebody else's marker values. And like I say, there are 1 million people in the database, so your values will be compared with 1 million other people to see who you match or who you're close to. It also tells you your Y-DNA haplogroup, which is just roughly, haplogroup is a group of people with a broadly similar genetic signature. So what you find in Western Europe, haplogroup OR1b is very, very common. You hardly see it in China. Okay? And it just means that as the humans came out of Africa, they developed little mutations and developed their own individualistic genetic signatures over the course of thousands and thousands of years. And that's why the genetic signature of the Irish doesn't look like the genetic signature of the Chinese. Okay? And you can get down into finer and finer detail as time goes on. And that gives you an idea of the kind of migration patterns that people are able to research using this DNA. This is a list of my Spirin matches. And I've obliterated the forenames just for privacy reasons. But you can see that I have quite a few people called Spirin who are matching me. This is actually my third cousin because I'm a Gleason. I had to get my third cousin to do the test. You also see Mulligan, Manning, Mackenzie, Baxter. There's other people in there. These are people to whom I'm probably related before the time of surnames, so over 1,000 years ago. Okay? But this gives you an idea of what your results will look like when you get them. But the results, again in themselves, they do tell you more than just looking at your own individual results, but you need to join a surname project to really start comparing your DNA with everybody else's. And this is an example of the Spirin project. Here's somebody up here, one of the members of the group. We tested 4 people initially, because you saw how many different variations of the surname there are. I thought, I will eat my hat if these people match each other. And so 4 people tested. They all had ancestry in Limerick. And when the results came back, this was the first set of results. And what you're looking at here really is all the markers in the chromosome. I like to think this is the Y chromosome lying on its side, and then below each of the markers is the value for each of that marker. And here's the first person, and then the second person was almost an exact match, and then the next 3, they were almost exact matches, 11, 11, 11, 25, 25, 25. It's only when you get to these little colored bits out here that there's a minor mutation. So this told us quite clearly that you are all closely genetically related to each other. So it took me 3 weeks to eat my hat. The second lesson was, beware of surname spelling. It is misleading. A Spearing could very well be related to a Spirin. Lesson 3, and this was a very important lesson, was you are on the right track. Keep going. Keep researching where you're going. And that is one of the biggest lessons that DNA tells us. It either tells us, yes, you're on the right track, keep going where you're going, or else, no, forget about that, go and research somebody else. Because I was ready to give up on my Spirin line, but it's only when I saw that we matched each other that I was given the message, keep going, you're on the right track. And more people tested, and now we have about 11 people in the group representing 9 families from all over the world: Australia, Ontario, Florida, Limerick, Dublin, and everybody matches each other with just a few minor mutations, these coloured blocks here on the right-hand side. Everybody goes back to Limerick, 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 Limerick. So, lesson 4, any Spirin or Spiring who can trace their ancestry back to Limerick is probably a close genetic match to everyone else in that group. And that's another very important lesson to be learned. So, of course, I'm a Gleason, so my Y DNA goes Gleason, 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 Gleason. So to get to my Spirin ancestor, I had to go back up to my great-great-great-grandfather, and I had to trace his descendants, all his descendants, looking for a direct male line, where the Y DNA would have passed from father to son, to son, to son, to son. I found it in my cousin, Brian, who did the test, and he came back as a match to everybody else in that genetic family. So what this means, and here is that original diagram again, with my Dublin family added in here. There's me, there's my cousin Brian. We also have 2 more Ontario families, a Philadelphia family and a Georgia family. Each of them has their own brick wall at this red point here, but it meant that because all of us were, because of Hartwell's Spirin, some of the families could go back using documentary evidence to these early Limerick families, but because all of us were genetically related to each other, it means that all of us who don't have Hartwell among our ancestors, the Hartwell-Spirin combination among our ancestors, we can piggyback onto the people with the longest genealogy. And that's why, if you do the DNA test, you're hoping that you're going to match somebody who has a really long genealogy for your surname, or maybe the family Bible that is going to allow you to piggyback on their information and jump back a couple of extra generations in your own family tree. Of course, we still have these missing generations up here for most people, but now the DNA is saying, keep going, you're on the right track, try and find documentary evidence to fill the gaps in the tree. So, can we link to the London Spirins? Remains a question. Can we link to the Cambridge Spirins? Remains a question. And can we go back to Flanders? So these are still questions that are even further back in the ancestral tree. But so far, all of us can go back to these early Limerick Spirins, these wills we discovered earlier on, and we need to fill out these missing generations. We also need to see if we can jump back to London, jump back to Cambridge, and jump back to Flanders. So we started at that stage more intensive research. We set up a website and a blog to document and publish our research as we go along, because you probably all know it goes in one ear and within a couple of weeks it's gone completely, and then a couple of years later you come across something and said, oh, did I do this already? Or you're looking through records and you think, gosh, this looks terribly familiar. So it's important to document things as we go along. We've set up a Facebook page and have created a real social aspect to the project. We encourage sharing of information, encourage further recruits. We have a blog as well, and a formal DNA project with Family Tree DNA, and that's it there. And we've established the project as a one-name study with the Guild of One-Name Studies. So if anybody's interested in doing a surname study, do get in touch with the Guild of One-Name Studies. They've got great resources for you. We did a lot of further documentary search to look at the link to the London Spirings, the link to the Cambridge Spirings. There's lots of documentary evidence. There's a lot of trade with Flanders between for the London Spirings, but there's no DNA descendants identified so far. Ideally, we need somebody who's descended from them to do the DNA test and then prove that there is a connection to the Limerick Spirings. The same with Cambridge. Lots of documentary evidence. They did trade with Flanders as well, so there definitely is a strong connection between the Spirin name and Flanders. But again, we don't have any DNA descendants identified so far, so we haven't confirmed that. But this is an ongoing quest. There's a lot more to do with the Spearin family. If you're interested, then it's all available on YouTube. If you Google DNA and family tree research, you'll find that I've put up 5 20-minute videos that describe all of this research in a lot more detail. And of course, this video will be available at that address as well. DNA and family tree research on YouTube. So, exploring the link to Flanders was quite fun because we used a variety of different facilities, such as surname distribution maps, surname dictionaries, and DNA. I'm going to run through them very quickly because I think you'll find this very interesting if you want to explore the origin of your particular surnames. And worldnames.publicprofiler.org is a very, very useful site. If you put in the name Spearin, you can see there's my cousin Brian, right there in and around Dublin, and there's some Spearins in London as well. If I add a G onto Spearing, watch what happens to the concentration. Everything moves over to northern Germany, Holland, and Belgium. So there's a huge movement. The whole thing moves across. And if I add an S onto Spearings, it still remains around the Holland area, maybe southern England, but Belgium as well, and a bit of northern Germany. Then if I change it from the European spelling to the anglicized spelling, Spear, S-P-E-A-R-I-N-G, watch what happens. Everything moves over to England. So what this is telling us that we could have German roots or Northern European roots, or we could all be from Somerset. And that would be feasible because, of course, a lot of the people who were planted here from England during the plantation of Desmond and the Munster plantation, they would have been from that Somerset area. So we could very well be descended from planter stock from England. So the distribution maps did not answer anything, but they did give us these tantalizing clues. Now, we also turned to surname dictionaries, and there's a lot of surname dictionaries online. Maclysis didn't have anything in it. Wolf had just a couple of lines, but nothing to really give an indication of where the Spearins came from. But, and you have to be careful with surname dictionaries because you don't know, they never really quote their sources, so you can't really rely on how academically robust they are. But from a variety of different online sources, and I've got the HTTP web addresses there. There was one that said that Spearin was a German occupational name for a fisherman from Middle Low German, spearing, denoting a small saltwater fish. Or alternatively, in some instances, the surname may have arisen as a nickname for someone thought to resemble the said fish. Now, I know that I've got Spearin cousins in the audience, so in your own time, just casually look around the room and see if you can spot anyone who looks like a fish. I've seen two. And there's the fish. There's the fish. And this is a Spearin. And it's the Dutch and a German word for smelt. Does anybody know the word smelt? Yeah? Okay. A small trout-like fish that lives in salt water but spawns in fresh water. It's called a smelt in England, it's called a spearing in Dutch and German, but on the west coast of Scotland it is called a sparling. Now, any of you who have Limerick connections will know that sparling is a Palatine name. And the Palatines were a group of 200 German families that were shipwrecked, I believe, off the coast of Cork and saved by Lord Southwell and brought to the Southwell estate where he settled them. And the Spearins and the Palatine families intermarried very, very avidly. The Spearins married Switzers, they married Modlers, they married Ruttle, Teskey. There's a variety of Palatine names that the Spearins interacted with. Is that because the Palatines who were like Sparling recognized Spearing as a Palatine name? And therefore, does that kind of increase the chances that we were actually from Flanders rather than from Somerset? Some fascinating and tantalizing questions arising. So it's also called Sparling, especially in Scotland, which is a potential variant of Spearing and a name common among the Palatine population of Limerick. So it's from surname dictionaries and from surname distribution maps, you can get some wonderful clues. They may not answer your questions, they may raise more questions than answer them, but it still gives you a fascinating adventure. Now, DNA can also help as well. These are the group from Limerick. These are the group that all match each other. But we've tested a variety of different other people, and you can see them here. We've tested people from England, not sure where the origin of these ones are. There's another one with ancestry in England, European ancestry here, Jan Sperik van Hazevik, 1350 to 1420. Another European here from the Netherlands, and there's an Irish one here. But basically what this tells us that of all of the English and European Spearings and Spearings that we have tested, none of them have matched our family from Limerick. So we cannot say with any definite assertion at this point in time that we do have English or European ancestry on the basis of the DNA testing that has been done so far. What we're hoping for eventually is that either somebody with English roots or somebody with Flemish roots will eventually test, and they will be a very close match to the people in the genetic family one, we call it, which is the Limerick family. So that's the hope. So DNA testing is continuing. It has not answered the question at this point in time. The other thing that I need to be aware of is this Irish guy here. His James Sperrin came from Limerick and ended up in Australia, but he doesn't match anybody in the Limerick group. And that's because when he got his results back, he had 3 matches on his Y DNA. The first one was Denman, the second one was Denman, and the third one was Denman. So that suggests very strongly that his Spearin line was, shall we say, interrupted somewhere in the not too distant past, and instead of Spearin Y DNA being passed through along his direct male line, the milkman or the postman came in, and it was his name was probably Denman. So he is now searching for his genetic great-great-great-great-grandfather to see just exactly if he can find documentary evidence of a Denman living beside a Spearin, and perhaps intervening where he should not. So that's why DNA testing does come with a public health warning. It may reveal illegitimacy, it may reveal a secret adoption. And how do you know that you weren't a secret adoption? Well, it's a secret, so you wouldn't. So you could have been switched at birth, as recently was discovered in Canada. Half-siblings, you might discover half-siblings you never knew you had. So it may give you unexpected answers. It is not for those of a nervous disposition. One of the chief executive officers of one of the big companies, Family Tree DNA, says, if you don't like skeletons, don't go opening closets. So we talked about SNP testing some time ago. Oh, that's good. I'm okay for time. It shows you how to, about the migration of human beings across the planet. But we're discovering new SNP markers all the time. These are a particular type of DNA marker. And as a result of these discoveries, we are also able to map where the highest concentration of a particular marker occurs. And so for the Limerick Spearin group, they belong to haplogroup IM223, and M223 is the marker that marks the end of their particular branch at this point in time. But as we discover more markers, there'll be sub-branches and sub-branches, and our terminal marker will change over time as more markers are discovered. But currently, the terminal marker is M223. The highest concentration of M223 is in and around North Germany, which is consistent with the Flanders origin. Up in Scotland and Northern Ireland, not entirely sure how it got there. Is this concentration left over from a previous migration? And also perhaps up in northern Sweden. So were we Vikings? You know, so then again, it raises questions, but at this level of detail, it's not enough to answer them. But over time, and we are doing further SNP marker testing in the Spearin group, and we are finding further and further sub-branches that we're on. But over time, we're hoping that it will eventually lead us back to Flanders, or lead us back to England. It might even lead us back up to Sweden. So that is further testing that is ongoing. And because genetic genealogy is such a young science, we are really on the crest of the wave of scientific discovery. And anyone who does a DNA test today or whenever, you will be part of that movement to actually try and find out scientifically where we are from, and maybe more importantly, where are we going? So it's a very, very exciting hobby, and it gives a new perspective to things. So if you thought that you'd be getting away from the computer, with DNA testing, you'll never leave it. So that's another health warning as well. The other great thing about it is it's beginning to link us up to some of the ancient Irish genealogies. And we're going to hear some fantastic presentations this afternoon from Kathy Swift and from Elizabeth O'Donoghue-Ross on the Munster Irish Project and on DNA testing and clans and people migrating into and out of Ireland. So don't miss that, because it'll shed a little bit more light on this particular topic. And the last little bit that we are going to talk about is the reconstruction of genetic family 1, which is the Limerick experience. What do we do with those 3 to 4 missing generations? What can we actually do? And just to recap, there they are up there. And DNA can help, but also documentary evidence can help as well. And I'm going to run through a few things here. These are the actual wills. That's Matthew Spearin from 1718, and then his brother Luke was 1726, and from that we reconstructed the family tree, a very extensive family tree of the early Limerick Spearins, who married into the Hartwell family, granted land, and Charles I, Cromwell. There was a question at one stage, did we come over with Cromwell? How do you handle that in the family? Because not a lot of people would want to know that. But I was able to establish that the Hartwells were very, very fond of Charles I, fought in his armies, and therefore it's highly likely the Spearins married into the Hartwells would be very unlikely to be Cromwellian orientated and more likely to be Charles. So, we're with Charles. We're lucky enough to actually have documentary evidence for 2 of the ancestral lines. So one line comes down here and ends with Sir Anthony Hartwell, who lives in England, down in the home counties. And I've written to him, and I'm waiting for a reply to see if he can put me in touch with the family genealogist and maybe get some more information about these early Limerick Spearins and their relationship with the Hartwell family. And there's another family in Limerick, the Parker family, who we do have documentary evidence that links them directly to these early Limerick Spearins. But for most of us, we just have these 3 to 4 generations of missing ancestors. So can DNA help? Well, on both of these lines, there's a female up there, and that is going to block the transmission of the Y DNA. So testing the Y DNA on either of these families is going to give you Hartwell DNA here, and it's going to give you Parker DNA here. So it's not going to have any influence on the Spearin side of the project. There's still 3 to 4 missing generations. We are collecting orphan records all the time. We find these individual records. There's a Spearin mentioned here. Where do they fit in? Not sure. And we're putting them all into a spreadsheet, and we're still trying to find out how did they get to Limerick in the first place and why. And this is a tantalizing scrap of information that we got from Sir William Beetham. And just to, I'll skip through this, but it just gives you an idea of, that is the scrap of information that links us to the London Spearins. Because he says here, the Spearin was involved in the visitation of London, and over here it says Luke Spearin of Kappa, which is just down the road, and his brother, Matthew, were George's sons. So, and by doing a whole variety of documentary investigations, there's the translation up there, we came to there was the visitation of London, and there is George Spearing married to Rebecca Carter. But by looking at all of this information, we were able to put a lot of information together on the London Spearings, but we weren't able, with any degree of real conviction, to assert that Beetham's notes were actually correct and that the Limerick Spearings originated from London. The other day I went into the Earl of Dunraven's estate papers in the University of Limerick Library, because we're on the Earl of Dunraven's estate practically here. It was all around it there, and there are some very, very useful documentary papers there that can be useful for genealogical purposes. I went in and my question was, are there any records of the Spearman family among the Earl of Dunraven's estate papers? And it's been a few years before I went into a library and I got the batch of papers, and then you open the first one and the waft of the paper and the smell of mold, wafting into your nostrils, you know. And then the librarian said, actually, it's not the papers, it's you. So, so the big question was, could I find anything in these papers? And the first one I opened was the transfer of the tithes of Adare from the Vicar of Adare, Reverend Edward Ingram, to Valentine Richard Quinn, whose family later became the Earl of Dunraven. This was the first document, and I read through it, and at the end, this is what I came across. According to ye best of our knowledge, ye something contained in ye too within is a true account of ye glebes, tithes, and dues belonging to the vicarage of Adare, as witness our hands this first day of August, 1697, Henry Winthorne, Francis Wyde, and in the middle of the last lot of names, Matthew Spearman. I have found my ancestor. I was home. So that was absolutely amazing. This person here might be Thomas Hartwell. There was a colon here, and I think that means that there's an abbreviation. So they've actually cut it off. You know, there's more to the actual word, but the colon indicates that the word has been abbreviated. So I'm assuming that that means Matthew, and this could very well be Hartwell. So that's what I found in the Earl of Dunraven's estate papers. The one-name study is still ongoing, and we are still collecting documentary evidence like this. There's still more from the Earl of Dunraven's estate papers I need to collect, but all of this will be put on the website. All of this will be used to reconstruct the branches from the records. Many trees with many brick walls. We will have to characterize the most distant known ancestor for each of those brick walls. You know, what does naming convention give us in terms of clues? Can we make a guess as to what the parents' names were? Can we make a guess as to perhaps if they had any brothers and sisters based on the baptisms, the sponsors? So there's a lot of documentary evidence still needs to be done. And we're reaching the stage now with the DNA markers that we will be able to use DNA as a substitute for missing people in the tree. So eventually we're going to end up with something like this, starting at the present day with known people and going back in time. Most people maybe having a brick wall around about 1830, 1800, and then from that point on, the DNA markers will take over. And we hopefully in the next couple of years will be able to insert DNA markers instead of people, and because of the DNA markers, they have a certain time associated with them, we should be able to identify the branching points in the family. So even though we may not be able to identify the person, and it may be just a DNA marker that sits there instead, we should be able to know, well, this family here and this family here, they're connected probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations above their current most distant known ancestor. So at least we'll be able to have a combined mutation history and family history tree. And that's for the future. So to summarize, why DNA unites us all in Limerick. We have a common ancestor. It helps focus further research, and it stops us giving up. It says you're on the right track, keep going. It may reveal our surname's origins in time, but we're not there yet. The family tree reconstruction is possible. DNA will help. We're still early days there. New records will help, and there are new records coming online all the time. So our family tree has taken us on a unique and exciting adventure. We never thought we'd look like fish, but apparently we do. And it took us this June to the Spearman log cabin in Barrie, Ontario, built in 1834, lived in by the Spearman family who emigrated from Limerick up until 1962, when Dr. Curtis Spearman, a vet in Barrie, donated it to the Simcoe County Museum. And this June, we met at the log cabin. Here is Dr. Curtis now, aged 92. Here are all my 8th and 9th Spearman cousins that I know from Facebook, but we've never met each other before. So this was the Spearman family reunion of 2015, and there is still more to come. Thank you very much for your attention.